The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty training ground at Fort Huachuca. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her brow as she adjusted her pack, the weight of 60 pounds pressing against her shoulders like a concrete blanket. Around her, 23 other soldiers prepared for the most grueling phase of Army Ranger training, but Maria stood out like a rose among thorns. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, she looked almost fragile compared to her male counterparts. Her long black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and despite the harsh desert environment, her features retained a delicate quality that had earned her unwanted attention since the day she enlisted. "Well, well, well," came a familiar voice behind her. "Look what we have here, boys. Princess Maria is still hanging around." Maria didn't need to turn around to know who was speaking. Sergeant Jake Morrison had been her biggest tormentor since day one of Ranger training. At 6 feet 2 inches and built like a linebacker, Morrison commanded respect from most of the other candidates through sheer intimidation. His followers, a group of 7 Marines who had transferred to the Army program, formed his personal entourage. "I'm surprised she made it this far," chuckled Corporal Danny Walsh, Morrison's right-hand man. "Most princesses would have quit by now and gone back to their palace." The other Marines laughed loudly, their voices carrying across the training area. Maria felt her jaw clench, but she kept her eyes forward, focusing on checking her equipment one final time. She had learned early in the program that responding to their taunts only encouraged them. "Maybe Daddy pulled some strings to get her this far," suggested another Marine, Corporal Tim Rodriguez. "You know how these rich girls are, they get everything handed to them." Maria's hands stilled on her gear. If only they knew the truth about her background, they might think twice about their assumptions. But she had never told anyone about growing up in the poorest neighborhood of East Los Angeles, where gunshots were as common as sirens and dreams seemed as distant as the stars. Her father hadn't pulled strings to get her here. In fact, her father had been shot and killed when she was 12, leaving her mother to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Maria had joined the Army not for glory or adventure, but because it was her only path out of poverty. Every dollar of her military pay went home to help support her younger siblings. "Hey, Princess," Morrison called out louder now, clearly trying to get her attention. "I'm talking to you." Maria finally turned around, her dark eyes meeting Morrison's ice blue stare. "My name is Staff Sergeant Santos, and I'm here to train just like everyone else." Morrison stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that made several other candidates uncomfortable. "Listen here, Princess. This isn't some game you can charm your way through. When we get out there in the desert, it's going to be brutal. Men are going to die in combat, and they need to know their teammates can handle the pressure." "I can handle whatever you can handle," Maria replied calmly, though her heart was racing. The 7 Marines burst into laughter again. "Did you hear that, boys?" Morrison announced to the group. "Princess thinks she can keep up with real soldiers." "This ought to be entertaining," Walsh muttered. "I give her 2 hours before she's crying for a medic." Master Sergeant Williams, the lead instructor, appeared suddenly beside the group. His weathered face showed no emotion as he surveyed the candidates. "Gentlemen and lady, it's time to begin the final phase of your training. For the next 72 hours, you will be tested in ways that will push you beyond your perceived limits." He gestured toward the vast expanse of desert that stretched to the horizon. "Your mission is to navigate 30 miles of hostile terrain while carrying full combat loads. You will face simulated enemy attacks, equipment failures, and extreme weather conditions. Some of you will not make it to the end." Williams paused, his gaze settling on Maria for a moment. "This exercise has broken stronger candidates than some of you. It requires not just physical strength but mental toughness and tactical intelligence. Those who complete this phase will earn the right to wear the Ranger tab. Those who don't will return to their regular units." The instructor pulled out a map and spread it on a wooden table. "Your route takes you through Devil's Canyon, across the Skeleton Ridge, and finally through the Apache Valley. Each checkpoint has specific challenges you must complete before moving forward." Morrison raised his hand. "Sergeant Williams, what happens if someone can't keep up with their team?" Williams looked directly at Morrison. "In combat, soldiers adapt and overcome. Good Rangers find ways to help their teammates succeed. Poor Rangers look for excuses to leave people behind." The implied criticism in Williams' words made Morrison's face redden slightly, but he said nothing more. "You'll be divided into teams of 4," Williams continued. "Each team will start 30 minutes apart to prevent following. Radio contact is prohibited except for genuine emergencies." Maria felt her stomach tighten as Williams began calling out team assignments. She found herself paired with 3 candidates she barely knew: Private Johnson, a quiet young man from Oklahoma; Specialist Brown, an experienced soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan; and unfortunately, Corporal Martinez, one of Morrison's Marine followers. "Great," Martinez muttered under his breath when he heard his assignment. "Stuck babysitting the princess?" Private Johnson, who couldn't have been more than 19 years old, looked nervous about the whole situation. Specialist Brown, a seasoned veteran with graying temples, simply nodded and began organizing his equipment with professional efficiency. "Listen up, team," Brown said in a calm voice that commanded attention. "I don't care what anyone's background is or what problems you have with each other. For the next 3 days, we're family. We succeed together or we fail together." Martinez opened his mouth to say something, but Brown cut him off with a sharp look. "I've seen good soldiers die because teammates couldn't put aside their personal issues. That's not happening on my watch." Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward the older soldier. At least one person on her team seemed focused on the mission rather than proving a point. Williams called the first team to the starting line. Morrison's team, predictably, had been selected to go first. As they disappeared into the desert, Morrison shouted back toward Maria's group, "See you at the finish line, princess, if you make it that far." His laughter echoed across the desert as his team vanished behind a rocky outcropping. "Ignore him," Brown advised quietly. "Guys like that usually flame out when things get really tough." 20 minutes later, it was Maria's turn. She stood at the starting line with her teammates, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes watching her. She knew that many of the other candidates, and probably some of the instructors, expected her to fail spectacularly. Williams approached their team with a GPS device and a sealed envelope containing their first set of instructions. "Your mission begins now. Remember, this is about more than just physical endurance. Rangers must be able to think clearly under extreme stress." The starting whistle blew, and Maria's team began jogging toward the desert. The initial pace felt manageable, but she knew it would become increasingly difficult as the heat intensified and fatigue set in. As they moved across the sandy terrain, Martinez kept glancing over at her, clearly expecting signs of weakness. Johnson struggled slightly with his pack, while Brown set a steady rhythm that seemed sustainable for the long haul. After the first mile, they encountered their first challenge, a simulated minefield marked with red flags. According to their instructions, they had to navigate through the obstacle course without triggering any of the pressure-sensitive alarms hidden throughout the area. Brown studied the layout carefully. "This requires patience and communication. We go one at a time, calling out safe paths for the others to follow." "I'll go first," Martinez volunteered, probably hoping to show off his skills. "Negative," Brown replied firmly. "Santos has the smallest profile. She'll have the best chance of finding the safest route." Martinez looked annoyed, but he couldn't argue with the tactical logic. Maria moved forward slowly, testing each step carefully before committing her full weight. The ground was littered with hidden sensors, and one wrong move would result in a time penalty that could doom their team's chances. Step by step, she made her way through the obstacle course, calling out warnings and directions to her teammates. Her small size, which had been the subject of so much ridicule, actually proved to be an advantage in navigating the tight spaces between the sensors. "Clear path along the left side," she called back. "Watch for the sensor cluster near the big rock." One by one, her teammates followed her route successfully. Even Martinez grudgingly nodded his approval when they emerged from the minefield without triggering a single alarm. "Nice work," Brown said simply, but his tone conveyed genuine respect. They pressed forward into the desert, the temperature rising with each passing hour. By noon, the heat was becoming truly oppressive. Johnson was already showing signs of heat exhaustion, his face flushed red and his breathing labored. "We need to find shade and rest," Brown announced. "No point in having a teammate collapse from heat stroke." They found a small overhang of rock that provided minimal relief from the sun. Brown produced electrolyte tablets from his pack and insisted everyone drink water mixed with the supplements. "The princess is holding up better than I expected," Martinez admitted quietly to Brown, apparently not realizing that Maria could hear him. "She's not a princess," Brown replied. "She's a soldier, same as you." As they rested in the shade, Maria found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in East LA, she had watched too many of her friends fall victim to drugs, violence, or simply the crushing weight of poverty. The military had offered her a chance at a different life, but she quickly learned that being a woman in a male-dominated profession came with its own unique challenges. During her early training, male soldiers had either tried to protect her unnecessarily or had gone to the opposite extreme of treating her like she was incompetent. Very few had simply accepted her as an equal and judged her solely on her performance. The constant scrutiny and skepticism had forged her into a stronger person, but it had also isolated her. She had learned to rely primarily on herself, to push through pain and exhaustion without complaint, and to prove herself again and again in situations where her male counterparts were given the benefit of the doubt. "Time to move," Brown announced after 30 minutes of rest. They resumed their trek across the desert, following a compass bearing toward their next checkpoint. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, with loose sand giving way to rocky hills and deep ravines. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became almost unbearable. Johnson was struggling more with each mile, his pace slowing noticeably. Martinez, despite his earlier skepticism about Maria, was also beginning to show signs of fatigue. Maria, however, seemed to be hitting her stride. Her smaller frame required less energy to move across the terrain, and her natural endurance was beginning to show. She found herself unconsciously taking point, setting a pace that challenged the others while remaining sustainable for the long haul. "How is she still moving so strong?" Johnson gasped during one of their brief water breaks. Brown smiled grimly. "Some people are natural distance athletes. Size isn't everything in this business." The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon when they reached their second major obstacle, a rope bridge spanning a deep canyon. The bridge was old and weathered, clearly designed to test both their courage and their technical skills. Martinez volunteered to go first again, but this time Brown agreed. The Marine made his way across carefully, testing each plank before putting his full weight on it. When he reached the other side safely, he secured the rope and signaled for the next person to cross. Johnson went next, his movements cautious but steady. Brown followed, his experience evident in the confident way he handled the crossing. Finally, it was Maria's turn. As she stepped onto the first plank, she could hear Morrison's voice echoing in her mind. "Princess Maria can't handle the real stuff." She pushed the negative thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. The bridge swayed slightly in the desert wind, but she maintained her balance and moved steadily across. When she reached the other side, her teammates were waiting with expressions of respect. "Solid work," Brown said approvingly. As darkness began to fall, they faced their most challenging obstacle yet, a night navigation exercise through terrain filled with hidden enemies played by training cadre. They had to reach a specific checkpoint using only a compass and map, while avoiding detection by the opposing force. "This is where Rangers separate themselves from regular soldiers," Brown explained quietly. "Anyone can march during the day. It takes special skills to operate effectively in the dark." They moved through the darkness like ghosts, using hand signals to communicate and taking advantage of every piece of cover available. Maria's small stature once again proved to be an advantage, allowing her to move through areas where larger soldiers would have been easily spotted. When they successfully reached their checkpoint without being detected, even Martinez seemed genuinely impressed. "Maybe the princess really does have what it takes," he admitted to Brown. "I told you," Brown replied. "Never judge a soldier by their appearance. Judge them by their performance." As they settled in for a few hours of rest before the next phase of their mission, Maria allowed herself a small smile. She was still facing 2 more days of brutal challenges, and Morrison's team was probably somewhere ahead of them, but she had already proven something important to herself and her teammates. She wasn't just surviving Ranger training, She was excelling at it. The desert night was cold and unforgiving, but Maria felt warmer than she had in months. For the first time since the training began, she truly believed she might actually earn those ranger tabs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and probably more encounters with Morrison and his crew of doubters. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the field with her teammates, pushing herself to become the soldier she had always dreamed of being. The princess they had mocked was becoming a warrior, 1 mile at a time. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert with the subtle beauty of a watercolor painting, but Maria Santos had no time to appreciate the scenery. She and her team had been moving since 4 in the morning, navigating by starlight through terrain that seemed designed to break both spirits and ankles. Private Johnson had developed a severe limp during the night march, his left boot rubbing a blister that had grown to the size of a silver dollar. Specialist Brown, ever the professional, had bandaged the wound and redistributed Johnson's gear among the team members without complaint. "We stick together," Brown had said simply when Martinez suggested they might move faster without the injured soldier. "That's what Rangers do." Martinez, who had started the exercise viewing Maria as dead weight, now found himself struggling more than the woman he had dismissively called princess. His marine conditioning had prepared him for short bursts of intense activity, but the sustained endurance required for ranger training was revealing gaps in his preparation. Maria, meanwhile, seemed to grow stronger as the challenges intensified. Her background of running through the streets of East LA as a teenager, dodging gang territories and racing to make it home before dark, had given her an unconscious ability to maintain a steady pace over long distances. As they crested a rocky ridge, they spotted Morrison's team in the distance, clearly struggling with their own set of challenges. Morrison himself was shouting at one of his teammates, his voice carrying across the desert air with unmistakable frustration. "Looks like the Golden Boy is having some leadership problems," Brown observed quietly. They descended into a narrow valley where their next challenge awaited, a simulated combat scenario complete with smoke grenades, blank ammunition, and training cadre playing the role of enemy forces. Their mission was to assault a fortified position and capture a high-value target without losing any team members. Master Sergeant Williams emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, his face painted with camouflage and a stern expression. "Your target is located in that building complex 200 meters ahead. You have 30 minutes to plan your assault and execute the mission. The enemy force consists of 6 soldiers with automatic weapons and superior defensive positions." He handed Brown a folder containing intelligence photos and tactical information. "Failure to complete the mission, or casualties among your team, will result in immediate disqualification from the program." Brown spread the photos on a flat rock and studied them carefully. The target building was situated on high ground with excellent fields of fire in all directions. Direct assault would be suicide, but the terrain offered several potential routes for a more subtle approach. "What are you thinking?" Maria asked, leaning over to examine the intelligence. "We need a distraction," Brown replied. "Someone to draw their attention while the rest of the team flanks from the east side where that gully provides cover." Martinez immediately volunteered for the assault role. "I'll take point and suppress their positions while you guys move around." Brown shook his head. "That's exactly what they expect. We need someone fast and quiet to get in close without being spotted." All eyes turned to Maria. Her small size and natural agility made her the obvious choice for the infiltration role, but it was also the most dangerous assignment. "I can do it," she said without hesitation. "No way," Martinez protested. "If she gets spotted, the whole mission fails. We need someone with combat experience." "She has the best chance of getting through undetected," Brown replied firmly. "And if anyone here has something to prove, it's not Santos." Johnson, despite his injured foot, nodded in agreement. "She's been the strongest performer on our team so far." Martinez looked like he wanted to argue further, but the tactical logic was undeniable. Maria was their best option for the stealth approach. Brown outlined the plan quickly. "Santos infiltrates from the north side using that dry creek bed for cover. Martinez and I create a diversion from the west to draw their attention. Johnson provides overwatch from this ridge and coordinates our movements by radio." They synchronized their watches and moved into position. Maria crawled through the sandy creek bed, her rifle cradled in her arms as she covered the 200 meters to the target building inch by careful inch. The training cadre playing enemy soldiers were positioned exactly where the intelligence photos had indicated. They were scanning the obvious approach routes, expecting a conventional assault from trained soldiers who would follow standard military doctrine. What they weren't expecting was a small woman who had learned to move like a shadow through the dangerous neighborhoods of Los Angeles. Maria reached the back wall of the building complex just as Brown and Martinez began their diversionary attack. The sound of blank ammunition filled the air as the enemy soldiers focused their attention on the western approach. She slipped through a window that had been left open, probably as part of the exercise design. Inside, she found the high-value target, an instructor wearing civilian clothes and sitting calmly in a chair, waiting to see which team would reach him first. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Santos," he said with a slight smile. "Mission accomplished." The exercise ended with Williams calling a ceasefire. Maria's team had completed their objective in 18 minutes, well under the 30-minute time limit. More importantly, they had done it without taking any casualties. Morrison's team arrived at the valley 20 minutes later, covered in dirt and clearly exhausted. Morrison's face showed surprise, and something that might have been grudging respect when he learned that Maria's team had already completed the challenge successfully. "How did you do it so fast?" Walsh asked, genuinely curious. "Teamwork," Brown replied simply, "and good tactical planning." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he looked at Maria. "Lucky break, Princess. Don't expect the next one to be so easy." But his tone lacked the confident mockery of earlier taunts. For the first time, he seemed to be taking her seriously as a competitor rather than dismissing her as an inevitable failure. The teams were given 4 hours to rest and resupply before the next phase of the exercise. Maria found a shaded spot behind some rocks and allowed herself to eat a cold meal while reflecting on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Her teammates no longer questioned her capabilities. Johnson looked at her with open admiration, while Martinez had stopped making princess jokes and was actually asking for her tactical input. Even Brown, who had been professionally supportive from the beginning, now seemed to view her as a genuine asset rather than a potential liability. But the real test was still coming. The final phase of Ranger training was notorious for its psychological pressure as much as its physical demands. Candidates were pushed to their absolute breaking point and beyond, forced to operate effectively even when their bodies and minds were screaming for rest. "Santos," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Morrison approaching alone, his usual entourage of Marines nowhere in sight. His expression was unreadable as he sat down on a nearby rock. "I underestimated you," he said without preamble. Maria waited for the inevitable "but" or the backhanded compliment that would follow. Instead, Morrison surprised her with his next words. "I've been thinking about what Brown said yesterday about helping teammates succeed. Maybe I've been more focused on proving you didn't belong here than on becoming a better ranger myself." She studied his face, looking for signs of sarcasm or deception. Morrison had been her primary tormentor for weeks, and his sudden change in attitude seemed too convenient to be genuine. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked carefully. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert horizon. "My sister applied to medical school 3 times before she got accepted. Every time she was rejected, people told her she should consider nursing instead. Said she wasn't tough enough for the demands of being a doctor." He turned to look at Maria directly. "She's been a trauma surgeon for 5 years now, saves lives every day. I realized I've been doing to you what those people did to her." Maria felt a shift in her perception of Morrison. Underneath the arrogant exterior was someone dealing with his own insecurities and pressures. That didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped her understand it. "Your sister sounds like a strong person," she said diplomatically. "She is, and so are you." Morrison stood up, brushing sand off his uniform. "I still plan to earn those ranger tabs, but I'm done trying to sabotage your chances." He walked away before Maria could respond, leaving her to wonder if his change of heart was genuine or just another psychological tactic. Williams called all candidates together for the briefing on their final challenge. The last 24 hours of the exercise would test everything they had learned about leadership, endurance, and tactical thinking under extreme pressure. Your final mission, Williams announced, is to rescue a downed pilot from behind enemy lines. The pilot is located 12 miles from here in hostile territory. You will face enemy patrols, equipment malfunctions, and environmental hazards. He pointed to a map showing their route through some of the most challenging terrain in the training area. The pilot has been captured and is being held in a fortified compound. Your mission is to infiltrate the compound, rescue the pilot, and escort him safely to an extraction point. Williams paused to let the magnitude of the challenge sink in. You will be operating with minimal equipment and no backup support. Some of you will be assigned additional handicaps to simulate combat injuries. The enemy force you're facing consists of experienced Special Forces instructors who know this terrain better than you do. The instructor pulled out a set of index cards and began handing them out randomly to the candidates. Some cards were blank, indicating no additional challenges. Others contained instructions for various handicaps, simulated leg injuries, restricted vision, or equipment failures. Maria opened her card and felt her heart sink. Her handicap was severe. She would be required to complete the mission while carrying an additional 40 pounds of gear to simulate assisting a wounded teammate. Martinez, who received a blank card, immediately spoke up. "Sergeant Williams, I'll take Santos's handicap. She's already carrying her fair share." Williams shook his head. "The assignments are random and final. Rangers must adapt to whatever challenges they face." Maria felt the weight of additional equipment being loaded into her pack. The extra 40 pounds pushed her total load to over 100 pounds, nearly 80% of her body weight. For most people, such a load would be unbearable over a 12-mile march through difficult terrain. But Maria had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. Growing up poor had taught her to endure discomfort without complaint. Running through gang territories had developed her ability to maintain situational awareness under stress. Working multiple jobs while attending high school had built her mental toughness and time management skills. Most importantly, watching her mother work 3 jobs to support the family had shown her what real strength looked like. Carrying an extra 40 pounds through the desert seemed manageable compared to carrying the weight of an entire family's survival. The teams were reorganized for the final mission, mixing candidates who had been together throughout the previous challenges. Maria found herself assigned to a new team that included Morrison, Johnson from her previous team, and Corporal Stevens, one of the strongest performers in the entire class. Morrison looked at her pack, clearly noting the extra weight she was carrying. "We can redistribute some of that gear among the team," he offered. "I've got it," Maria replied. "Let's focus on the mission." Stevens, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, studied their route on the map. "This is going to be a long night. We need to pace ourselves and work together if we want everyone to make it to the extraction point." As darkness fell across the desert, the 4-person team began their approach to enemy territory. The first 6 miles were relatively straightforward navigation across open terrain, but Maria could feel the extra weight with every step. Her teammates, true to their word about working together, took turns carrying some of her essential gear while leaving her with the required handicap weight. It was a small gesture, but it demonstrated how much the dynamics had changed since the beginning of training. They encountered their first enemy patrol just after midnight. 5 training cadre members were positioned around a water source that the teams needed to cross to reach their objective. The enemy soldiers had night vision equipment and were clearly alert for approaching candidates. "We need to take them out quietly," Stevens whispered. "Any gunfire will alert other patrols in the area." They spent 30 minutes studying the patrol patterns before identifying their opportunity. During a brief window when 2 of the guards moved away from their posts, the team would have 90 seconds to neutralize the remaining 3 soldiers and secure the crossing. Morrison and Stevens would handle 2 of the guards while Johnson created a diversion. Maria's job was to neutralize the 3rd guard, despite carrying her handicap weight. The plan executed flawlessly. Maria approached her target from behind, moving silently despite her heavy load. When the moment came, she applied a sleeper hold that rendered the training cadre member unconscious within seconds. Where did you learn to do that? Morrison whispered with genuine admiration. Growing up in East LA teaches you a lot of useful skills, Maria replied quietly. They reached the enemy compound at dawn, exhausted but determined to complete their mission. The fortified position was even more challenging than the intelligence photos had indicated, with multiple layers of defenses and clear fields of fire surrounding the building where the pilot was being held. Stevens studied the layout through binoculars. This is going to require perfect timing and coordination. One mistake, and we're all dead. The rescue plan they developed was complex and risky. Morrison would create a distraction on the east side of the compound while Stevens and Johnson approached from the west. Maria, despite her handicap weight, volunteered for the most dangerous job, infiltrating the building itself to locate and extract the pilot. Are you sure you can handle the stealth approach with all that gear? Stevens asked with concern. Maria had been asking herself the same question. The extra weight made quiet movement significantly more difficult, and she would be operating alone inside the enemy compound. But someone had to do it, and her smaller size still made her the best choice for infiltration. I've got this, she said, with more confidence than she felt. The assault began at precisely 0600 hours. Morrison's diversionary attack drew most of the defending force to the eastern perimeter, while Stevens and Johnson moved into position to provide covering fire for Maria's extraction. Maria slipped through the compound's defenses like water through sand, her movements deliberate and precise despite the crushing weight on her back. She located the building where the pilot was being held and found a window that provided access to the interior. Inside, she discovered the pilot, actually a training cadre member playing the role of a wounded aviator. He looked surprised when a small woman appeared instead of the large male rangers he had been expecting. Time to go, sir, Maria whispered. Can you walk? The instructor nodded and followed her toward the window. But as they prepared to exit the building, the sound of approaching footsteps indicated that their presence had been detected. Maria made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her military career. Instead of abandoning the mission or calling for backup, she positioned herself between the pilot and the door, drew her training weapon, and prepared to hold off the enemy forces until her teammates could reach them. What happened next would become the stuff of Ranger legend, a story that would be told and retold throughout the special operations community for years to come. The small woman they had called Princess was about to show everyone what a real warrior looked like. The first enemy soldier through the door never saw Maria coming. Moving with the fluid precision of someone who had learned street fighting before she could drive, she struck him in the solar plexus with the butt of her training rifle. The instructor dropped to his knees, gasping for air as Maria smoothly transitioned to cover the doorway. "Stay behind me," she whispered to the pilot, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Two more training cadre members appeared in the doorway, their weapons raised. In a real combat situation, they would have opened fire immediately. But this was training, and they were curious to see how the smallest candidate in Ranger School would handle a desperate situation. They found out quickly. Maria feinted left, then dove right, using her smaller stature to stay below their line of sight while delivering a devastating leg sweep that sent the second instructor tumbling. Before he hit the ground, she had already engaged the third enemy soldier, disarming him with a move that would have made her old sensei from the community center proud. Outside, the sound of gunfire indicated that Morrison's diversion was working perfectly. Stevens and Johnson were advancing toward the building, but they were still 30 seconds away from providing support. 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Maria heard more footsteps approaching the building. The enemy force was converging on her position, drawn by the sounds of combat from inside. She had perhaps 10 seconds before she would be overwhelmed by superior numbers. That's when something clicked in her mind, a realization that had been building throughout the entire training exercise. She stopped thinking of herself as Maria Santos, the girl from East LA who was trying to prove she belonged. Instead, she became Staff Sergeant Santos, United States Army Ranger, defending her position and protecting her teammate. The transformation was visible to everyone watching. When the next wave of enemy soldiers entered the room, they encountered not a small woman struggling under a heavy pack, but a warrior who had found her element. Maria moved through the confined space like a force of nature, using every piece of furniture, every shadow, every angle to her advantage. Her combat techniques were unorthodox but devastatingly effective. Where a larger soldier might have relied on brute strength, Maria used speed, positioning, and leverage. She turned the cramped quarters that should have been a disadvantage into tactical superiority. The handicap weight that was supposed to slow her down became a weapon itself. When one instructor tried to tackle her, she shifted the pack's weight forward, using the momentum to drive him into the wall with bone-jarring force. Master Sergeant Williams, who had been observing the exercise from a hidden position, watched in amazement as Maria single-handedly held off 6 experienced Special Forces instructors. Her teammates burst through the window just as she was securing the last enemy soldier. "Holy shit, Santos," Morrison breathed, staring at the aftermath. "What the hell was that?" Stevens, a veteran of actual combat operations, shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen Delta Force operators who couldn't have pulled that off." But there was no time for congratulations. They still had to get the pilot to the extraction point, and the sound of gunfire had alerted every enemy patrol in the area. Within minutes, they would be facing a coordinated response from a much larger force. "We need to move now," Stevens urged. "The extraction point is still 4 miles away." Maria adjusted her pack, the extra weight feeling almost insignificant after what she had just accomplished. The pilot, who was actually Master Sergeant Rodriguez playing the role, looked at her with undisguised respect. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said quietly. "That was some of the finest close-quarters combat I've ever witnessed." They began moving toward the extraction point, but their troubles were far from over. The enemy force was now actively hunting them, using vehicles and helicopters to coordinate a systematic search of the entire training area. Morrison, who had started the exercise as Maria's biggest detractor, now deferred to her tactical judgment without question. When she suggested they avoid the obvious routes and instead traverse a treacherous cliff face that most soldiers would consider impassable, he immediately agreed. "If Santos thinks we can make it, that's good enough for me," he declared. The cliff traverse was nightmare fuel for anyone afraid of heights. They were forced to rope together and move single file along ledges that were barely wide enough for their boots. One mistake would send the entire team plummeting to their deaths. But Maria had grown up climbing fire escapes and abandoned buildings in the urban jungle of East LA. Heights didn't intimidate her, and her natural agility allowed her to find handholds and footing that others missed. She led the team across sections of cliff face that experienced mountaineers would have considered challenging. The extra weight in her pack, which should have made the climbing impossible, somehow didn't seem to affect her balance or endurance. Johnson, who was struggling with both the technical climbing and his injured foot, started to slip during one particularly difficult section. Without hesitation, Maria anchored herself and arrested his fall, preventing what could have been a fatal accident. "I've got you," she called down to him, her voice steady and reassuring. "Just focus on one move at a time." Stevens, who was bringing up the rear, muttered to himself, "Unbelievable. She's carrying extra weight, leading a technical climb, and now she's saving other people's lives." They reached the far side of the cliff just as enemy helicopters began searching the area they had vacated. Maria's tactical decision to take the difficult route had kept them ahead of their pursuers, but barely. The final 2 miles to the extraction point took them through a maze of canyons and dry creek beds. Maria continued to set the pace despite her handicap weight, somehow maintaining the steady rhythm that had carried her team through the entire exercise. As they approached the extraction zone, they encountered their final challenge, a roadblock manned by the remaining enemy force. 6 vehicles and 20 soldiers blocked the only route to their objective. Stevens studied the situation through binoculars. "There's no way around them. We're going to have to fight our way through." Morrison looked at their ammunition supply. "We don't have enough firepower for a direct assault against those odds." "Then we don't fight fair," Maria said quietly. She outlined a plan that was so audacious it bordered on insane. Instead of attempting to overpower the enemy force, they would infiltrate the roadblock by having Maria pose as a captured prisoner while the others approached from multiple directions. "That's suicide," Johnson protested. "If they don't buy the deception, you'll be trapped in the middle of their entire force." Maria smiled grimly. Sometimes you have to risk everything to win everything. The plan required perfect timing and absolute trust between team members. Maria would allow herself to be captured by Morrison, who would escort her into the enemy position claiming to have caught a fleeing Ranger candidate. While the enemy soldiers were distracted by processing their prisoner, Stevens and Johnson would eliminate the perimeter guards. What followed was a masterclass in tactical deception and close-quarters combat. Maria played her role perfectly, appearing defeated and exhausted while actually memorizing the positions and weapons of every enemy soldier. When Morrison gave the signal, she exploded into action once again. But this time, instead of fighting alone, she was part of a coordinated team assault that overwhelmed the enemy force through superior planning and execution. The roadblock was neutralized in less than 90 seconds, with all enemy soldiers killed or captured, according to the exercise rules. Maria's team had successfully completed the most challenging mission in Ranger training without losing a single member. As they reached the extraction point, Master Sergeant Williams was waiting with a helicopter and a broad smile. "Congratulations," he announced. "You have successfully completed the final phase of Ranger training." But Williams wasn't finished. As the candidates lined up for their final evaluation, he singled out Maria for special recognition. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "In 20 years of running this training program, I have never seen a more outstanding display of leadership, tactical thinking, and pure warrior spirit." He turned to address the entire group. This soldier was assigned a handicap that should have made mission completion nearly impossible. Instead, she carried her extra weight, led her team through the most challenging terrain in our training area, single-handedly held off 6 enemy soldiers, and then planned and executed one of the most brilliant tactical deceptions I've witnessed. Williams paused, making eye contact with Morrison and his former Marine followers. "Some of you spent weeks questioning whether she belonged in this program. I'm here to tell you that she doesn't just belong here. She's setting the standard that the rest of you should aspire to meet." The ceremony that followed was emotional for everyone involved. As Maria received her Ranger tab, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the streets of East LA to the deserts of Arizona, every challenge had prepared her for this ultimate test. Morrison approached her after the ceremony, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. "Santos, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my thanks. You made me a better soldier and a better person." "We all made each other better," Maria replied diplomatically. "That's what Rangers do." But Morrison wasn't finished. "No, you don't understand. During that final mission, when you volunteered for the most dangerous assignments despite carrying extra weight, when you saved Johnson's life on the cliff, when you came up with that brilliant deception plan, you weren't just completing tasks. You were showing the rest of us what leadership actually looks like." Stevens nodded in agreement. "I've served with some incredible soldiers in my career. You belong in that elite company." Even the training cadre members who had played enemy soldiers during the exercises approached Maria to offer their congratulations. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had played the captured pilot, shook her hand warmly. "That close-quarters battle in the compound was textbook perfect," he told her. "I'm going to use video of that engagement to train future Special Forces candidates." As the newly minted Rangers prepared to return to their regular units, Williams pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. "Santos, I've been authorized to offer you an opportunity," he said seriously. "Special Forces is looking for qualified Rangers to join their selection process. Based on your performance here, you would receive an automatic recommendation." Maria felt a surge of pride and excitement. Special Forces represented the absolute pinnacle of military service, the elite of the elite. To be invited to join their ranks was an honor that few soldiers ever received. "I'm interested, Sergeant," she replied. "When would selection begin?" 3 months, Williams answered. "That gives you time to prepare both physically and mentally. But I should warn you, if you thought Ranger training was challenging, Special Forces selection will test you in ways you can't imagine." Maria smiled, thinking about everything she had overcome to reach this point. "I've been tested my whole life, Sergeant. I'm ready for whatever comes next." As the transport vehicles arrived to take the new Rangers back to civilization, Maria took one final look at the desert training area that had transformed her from a doubted outsider into a proven warrior. She thought about the little girl who used to run through the dangerous streets of East LA, dodging bullets and gang members while dreaming of a better life. That girl had grown into a woman who could navigate any terrain, overcome any obstacle, and outfight any opponent. Morrison approached her one final time as they boarded the vehicles. "Hey, Santos," he called out. "I never did ask you. Where did that princess nickname actually come from?" Maria laughed, remembering her childhood in the barrio. "My little sister used to call me her princess because I always protected her from the bullies in our neighborhood. She said I was like a warrior princess from the movies." Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. "You know what? She was right. You are a warrior princess, and I couldn't be more honored to serve alongside you." As their vehicle pulled away from Fort Huachuca, Maria reflected on how much had changed over the course of their training. She had arrived as an outsider trying to prove she belonged in a man's world. She was leaving as a ranger, respected by her peers, and recommended for the most elite units in the military. The young woman who had been mocked as princess had become something far more valuable: a leader, a warrior, and an inspiration to everyone who had witnessed her transformation. But most importantly, she had proven to herself that there was no challenge too great, no obstacle too high, and no dream too ambitious for someone willing to work hard enough and fight long enough to achieve it. Her real journey was just beginning, but Maria Santos was ready for whatever battles lay ahead. After all, she had already won the most important victory of all: the battle to believe in herself. The princess had become a warrior, and the world would never be the same.